Marcus Johnson, an 8-year-old black boy, stands frozen before the massive digital wall display in Axion Technologies' executive boardroom. 20 senior executives stare in disbelief as his small finger traces a pattern across the screen, solving the quantum encryption algorithm that had stumped their research team for months. A security guard grabs his shoulder. He should not be here. In his mother's custodial uniform, CEO Richard Whitman, mocking smile, transforms into shock when the system accepts Marcus' solution, unlocking data worth billions. 20 years later, this moment would be remembered as the day that changed American tech forever. Elaine Johnson had been working at Axion Technologies for almost 3 years now, part of the night cleaning crew that swept through the gleaming headquarters after the executives and engineers had gone home. The pay was barely enough to keep their small apartment in the eastern part of the city, but it offered health insurance that covered Marcus' asthma medication, so she stayed despite the increasingly hostile work environment. On this particular Tuesday evening, Elaine had no choice but to bring Marcus along when her usual babysitter canceled at the last minute. She always kept him close, whispering instructions to sit quietly in the break room with his books and not wander the halls of the towering glass and steel building. Marcus nodded seriously, his large brown eyes solemn behind wire-rimmed glasses too big for his narrow face, but Elaine knew her son well enough to recognize the curious spark that meant he was already planning his exploration. He was different from other children his age, something she had noticed when he was still a toddler, counting ceiling tiles and recognizing patterns in ways that both amazed and worried her. The underfunded public school in their neighborhood had already advanced him 2 grades, but he still came home bored and restless, his mind hungry for challenges his environment could not provide. As Elaine pushed her cleaning cart down the executive floor corridor, she did not see Marcus slip away toward the soft blue glow emanating from an open office door. Inside, Marcus discovered a whiteboard covered in complex equations, symbols he had never seen in his schoolbooks, but which somehow made a tantalizing kind of sense to him. He found a notebook in his backpack and began copying them down, adding his own notes and questions in the margins. He had been doing this for weeks now, on the nights he accompanied his mother, building his own private curriculum from the scraps of knowledge left behind by Axion engineers. His secret education came to an abrupt halt when he heard angry voices approaching the office. Marcus ducked behind a large potted plant, just as Richard Whitman, the CEO whose face adorned the lobby portraits, stormed into the room with his chief technology officer. Whitman was a tall white man with silver hair and the confident stride of someone who had never had his right to occupy any space questioned. The CTO looked stressed, tugging at his collar as Whitman berated him about project deadlines and competitive advantages. When Elaine appeared in the doorway a moment later, spray bottle and cloth in hand, Whitman paused mid-sentence and turned his cold gaze toward her. "I need this office cleaned now," he snapped, despite having just entered it himself. "Yes, sir," Elaine replied, keeping her eyes downcast. She began spraying the glass conference table, moving efficiently around the men as they continued their conversation. As she reached for a coffee cup perched precariously at the edge of the table, Whitman shifted suddenly, bumping her arm. The cup toppled, spilling cold coffee across a stack of papers. "For God's sake!" Whitman exploded, jumping back as though the liquid were acid. "Can't you pay attention to what you're doing? This is sensitive material." Elaine apologized profusely, reaching for paper towels, but Whitman wasn't finished. "This is exactly why we should outsource all the cleaning staff. These people can't be trusted around valuable intellectual property." The pointed emphasis on these people hung in the air, the racial subtext unmistakable. "Sir, I can assure you," Elaine began, but Whitman cut her off. "One more incident like this, and you're done here, understand? I don't care how many diversity quotas HR wants to fill." Marcus, still hidden, felt heat rising in his face as he watched his mother nod silently, absorbing the humiliation with the practiced resilience of someone who had endured countless similar moments. When the men finally left, he emerged from his hiding place and helped his mother clean up the spill, his small hands working alongside hers in wordless solidarity. Later that night, as they were preparing to leave, Marcus followed his mother to the top floor where she was finishing her rounds. He paused outside the partially open door of the executive boardroom, where Whitman and several other men in expensive suits were still working despite the late hour. "The encryption protocol is the key to the entire system," Whitman was saying, his voice carrying the irritated tone of someone repeating himself. "Without it, the new financial platform is worthless. We've had MIT consultants working on this for months with no breakthrough." The CTO looked exhausted. "We may need to consider a different approach entirely, Richard." Whitman laughed bitterly. "And set us back another year while Westfield Securities eats our lunch? Not happening." He stood up, stretching his tall frame, and walked to the digital wall display where complex mathematical formulas and code sequences glowed in blue and white. "I'd pay $100 million to anyone who could solve this by the end of the month." He gestured dismissively at the screen. "Hell, I'd pay it to the janitor if she could fix this mess." The other executives chuckled at the absurdity. Marcus, hearing his mother's soft footsteps approaching, slipped away from the door, his mind already racing with the glimpse of the problem he'd seen on the screen. That night, tucked into his bed in their small apartment, while his mother slept the exhausted sleep of someone working 2 jobs, Marcus opened his notebook and began drawing what he remembered, feeling the familiar tingle of excitement that came when his mind encountered a puzzle worthy of its capabilities. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus became a shadow in Axion Technologies, moving through the building during his mother's night shifts with growing confidence and purpose. He discovered that the cleaning staff keycards offered surprising access to many parts of the building after hours, including an unused computer terminal in a small conference room on the 3rd floor. The terminal had been forgotten during a recent system upgrade, its login screen accepting the generic guest credentials Marcus had observed an intern using days earlier. His first successful login sent a thrill of achievement through him, followed immediately by the caution that came from a lifetime of his mother warnings about being twice as careful and 3 times as respectful as his white classmates. Still, the opportunity was too tempting to resist. Night after night, Marcus absorbed knowledge from Axion's digital library, teaching himself programming languages and advanced mathematical concepts with the voracious appetite of a mind finally finding nourishment. He was careful to leave no traces of his explorations, always logging out properly and returning to his mother's side before anyone noticed his absence. When not at the terminal, Marcus would position himself near the executive boardroom, listening to fragments of conversations about the encryption challenge that continued to frustrate the company's best minds. He pieced together that the problem involved quantum-resistant cryptography for a new financial transaction system, something that would give Axion a massive advantage in the banking security sector if they could perfect it before their competitors. Meanwhile, Elaine's work situation grew increasingly difficult. Thomas Reeves, the facilities manager who supervised the cleaning staff, had begun targeting her with unreasonable demands and heightened scrutiny. A middle-aged white man with thinning hair and perpetually pursed lips, Reeves seemed particularly irritated by Elaine's quiet competence and the respect she commanded from her coworkers. "Johnson, you missed spots on the 31st floor windows again," he said one evening, though Elaine had triple-checked her work, and the executive bathroom sinks need to be redone. "The chrome doesn't sparkle." Elaine nodded silently, knowing any defense would only make things worse. Marcus, waiting nearby with his backpack of books, observed the exchange with growing awareness of the pattern it represented. The following night brought an unexpected development when Marcus, absorbed in a particularly challenging section of quantum computing theory on his secret terminal, failed to notice someone entering the conference room until a voice spoke directly behind him. "You definitely don't work in marketing." Marcus jumped, nearly falling from his chair as he spun to face a young Asian woman with purple-streaked hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore jeans and a wrinkled button-up shirt with the Axion logo, her employee badge identifying her as Zoe Chen, junior programmer. Instead of anger, her expression showed surprising curiosity. "What are you doing here, kid? And how did you get access to these materials?" "They're graduate-level computer science texts," Marcus stammered, his usual confidence deserting him in the face of discovery. "Please don't tell anyone. My mom's a cleaner here, and she could lose her job." Something in his panic seemed to soften Zoe's expression. She glanced at the screen, then did a double-take at the complexity of the material he had been reading. "Wait, you understand this stuff? For real?" The disbelief in her voice contained no mockery, just genuine surprise. Cautiously, Marcus nodded. "Most of it. I'm stuck on the application of lattice-based cryptography to quantum environments, though." Zoe stared at him for a long moment, then pulled up a chair. "Show me what you've figured out so far." What began as a tense confrontation transformed into an impromptu tutoring session that stretched past midnight. Zoe, who had joined Axion just 6 months earlier after completing her master's degree, found herself simultaneously teaching and learning from this improbable 8-year-old prodigy. By the time they realized how late it had gotten, a tentative alliance had formed. "You can't keep using this terminal," Zoe warned, as they prepared to leave. "The system audit will eventually flag the activity." She hesitated, then added, "But I have access to the development library. I could download some materials for you, things that might help with what you're trying to understand." Marcus looked up at her, hope and suspicion warring in his expression. "Why would you help me?" Zoe considered the question seriously. "Because talent shouldn't be wasted just because of circumstance," she finally said. "And maybe because I know what it's like to be underestimated." Their arrangement continued in secret over the following days. Zoe provided learning resources and occasional guidance, breaking company policy but following what she felt was a higher ethical obligation to nurture exceptional potential. Marcus, for his part, began making remarkable progress on understanding the encryption problem that had the executive so concerned. He filled his notebook with calculations and theoretical approaches, working through the nights and even during school hours, earning him reprimands from teachers who mistook his abstraction for disrespect. One evening, Marcus was so absorbed in his work that he failed to notice Thomas Reeves approaching the break room where he had spread out his materials. The facilities manager had been looking for Elaine to assign her yet another last-minute task when he spotted the open notebook covered in complex mathematical notations. His eyes narrowed as he recognized symbols similar to those he had seen on the executive's presentations. Suspicion darkened his expression as he snatched up the notebook. "What is this? Where did you get this information?" Marcus froze, his mind racing for a plausible explanation, but Reeves was already storming out, notebook in hand, calling for security. Within 30 minutes, Elaine had been pulled from her duties and brought to a small security office where Reeves and 2 security guards were waiting, her son's notebook open on the table between them. "Mrs. Johnson, are you aware that your son has been collecting proprietary information from this company?" Reeves began, his tone making the question an accusation. "This notebook contains specific details about projects that are worth millions to our competitors." Elaine looked bewildered, her gaze moving between her son and the notebook. "Marcus, what is this about?" Before Marcus could answer, Reeves cut in. "This is corporate espionage, plain and simple. The cleaning staff has access to sensitive areas, and it appears you've been taking advantage of that trust." His voice hardened. "I'm recommending immediate termination of your employment and pursuing criminal charges for theft of intellectual property." The color drained from Elaine's face. "Criminal charges? But I haven't taken anything. I don't even understand what's in that notebook." "Convenient excuse," Reeves replied coldly. "I'm sure the police will be interested in how an 8-year-old acquired advanced encryption algorithms that our own engineers are still developing." The mention of police sent a visible tremor through Elaine, whose experiences as a black woman in America had taught her that such encounters could be dangerous regardless of innocence. The tense standoff was interrupted when the door opened and Zoe Chen entered, slightly out of breath as though she had hurried there. "Excuse me," she said, taking in the scene with quick intelligence. "There's been a misunderstanding. The materials in that notebook came from me." All eyes turned to her in surprise. "I've been tutoring Marcus in advanced mathematics and computer science. Those are practice problems I gave him from publicly available textbooks." Reeves narrowed his eyes, clearly skeptical. "You expect me to believe that? These are directly related to our proprietary systems." Zoe held his gaze steadily. "They may look similar because the fundamental principles are the same, but there's nothing proprietary in those notes. I'm happy to review them with you page by page if you'd like." The confrontation might have continued, but another interruption came in the form of Richard Whitman himself, who had been working late and heard about the commotion. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his imposing figure filling the doorway. Reeves quickly explained the situation, presenting the notebook as evidence of potential espionage. Whitman glanced at it dismissively, then looked at Marcus with undisguised skepticism. "You expect me to believe this child understands advanced cryptography? Please." His condescension was palpable. An uncomfortable silence filled the room until Marcus, gathering his courage, spoke up. "It's about creating mathematical lattices that can't be broken even by quantum computers, right? The problem is finding the right balance between security and processing efficiency." Whitman's eyebrows rose slightly, but his expression remained dubious. "Any child could repeat phrases they've overheard. That doesn't mean you understand the actual mathematics." A calculating look crossed his face. "Unless you'd like to prove it?" He gestured toward a whiteboard mounted on the wall. "Show us." The security office fell silent as Marcus approached the whiteboard, conscious of every eye upon him. Richard Whitman uncapped a marker with theatrical flourish and quickly sketched a complex mathematical problem, a simplified version of the encryption challenge, but still far beyond what any 8-year-old should comprehend. "Solve this," he said, stepping back with a smirk that betrayed his certainty of the boy's imminent failure. Marcus stared at the equation, his initial nervousness giving way to the familiar clarity that came when his mind engaged with numbers. He took the marker and began working through the problem, his small hand moving across the board with surprising confidence. The room remained tensely quiet, broken only by the squeak of the marker and the soft sound of Elaine shifting anxiously in her seat. After several minutes, Marcus placed the final symbols and stepped back, looking up at Whitman with quiet expectation. The CEO studied the board, his expression shifting from smugness to confusion and then to poorly concealed surprise. "That's correct," he admitted, though the words seemed to cost him considerable effort. "But it must be coincidence, a fluke." He erased the board with sharp, aggressive movements. "Anyone can get lucky once." Thomas Reeves, sensing his superior's displeasure, quickly added, "He must have memorized this particular problem somehow. Probably saw it on a screen or document." Whitman nodded, seizing on the explanation. "Exactly. No actual understanding, just rote memorization." He turned his cold gaze back to Marcus and Elaine. "This changes nothing about the serious breach of trust that has occurred." Zoe stepped forward again. "With respect, sir, Marcus has just demonstrated exceptional mathematical ability. Shouldn't that at least warrant further investigation before making accusations?" Whitman considered her for a long moment, his mind visibly calculating possibilities and risks. Finally, he smiled, but it was a smile that contained no warmth. "Fair enough. Let's make this interesting." He turned to Marcus. "Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock sharp, in the main conference room. I'll have our technical team prepare a comprehensive test more than rote memorization could possibly account for." His gaze shifted to Elaine. "If your son fails, and I expect he will, your employment will be terminated immediately, and we'll pursue all appropriate legal actions." He straightened his already immaculate tie. "However, in the extraordinarily unlikely event that he demonstrates genuine understanding, we might reconsider our position." With that, he strode from the room, leaving Reeves to dismiss them with barely concealed contempt. Outside the building, standing in the cool night air of the parking lot, Elaine turned to her son with fear and confusion evident in her eyes. "Marcus, what is happening? Where did you learn all those things on the whiteboard?" Before he could answer, Zoe, who had followed them out, interjected. "Your son is genuinely brilliant, Mrs. Johnson. I've never seen anything like it." She hesitated, then added more quietly, "But tomorrow's test won't be fair. Whitman doesn't want to be proven wrong, especially not by." She trailed off, but the implication was clear, especially not by a black child from a working-class background. "Then why are we doing this?" Elaine asked, the weariness of a lifetime of fighting uphill battles evident in her voice. "We should just find another job." Marcus shook his head firmly. "Mom, I can do this. I know I can." His young face showed a determination that went beyond his years. "And I think there's something wrong at Axion. Something in the numbers doesn't make sense." Zoe looked sharply at him. "What do you mean?" Marcus explained his observations about inconsistencies in the financial algorithms he had glimpsed during his explorations. "It's like someone built a back door into the system, but disguised it so well that most people wouldn't notice unless they were looking for exactly the right pattern." The three of them spoke in hushed tones for nearly an hour, Zoe helping Marcus organize his thoughts and knowledge in preparation for the next day's challenge. As they prepared to part ways, Elaine to take Marcus home for what little remained of the night, Zoe to her own apartment to gather resources that might help, Marcus suddenly remembered something. "There was something else, too," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "Last week I heard Mr. Whitman on the phone in his office. He sounded angry, saying things like keeping the modifications hidden and millions that no one will trace. I thought he was talking about the encryption problem, but now I'm not sure." The adults exchanged concerned glances, the implications hanging heavy in the pre-dawn air. As they walked toward the bus stop, Marcus felt the weight of tomorrow's test pressing down on him, but also a growing certainty that he had stumbled onto something much bigger than a simple employment dispute. Back in his office, Richard Whitman poured himself 3 fingers of expensive scotch and stared out at the city skyline, his mind racing with contingency plans. The boy was an unexpected variable, a potential threat that needed to be neutralized carefully. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he rarely used. "We might have a situation," he said without preamble when the call connected. "I need additional security measures implemented immediately." He paused, listening to the response. "No. Nothing that direct. Just make sure that certain access points are restricted. And have someone look into Elaine Johnson and her son. I want to know everything by morning." Morning arrived too quickly, the pale sunlight filtering through the threadbare curtains of the Johnson apartment, finding Marcus already awake, his mind cycling through mathematical principles and encryption theories. He had slept barely 3 hours, spending the remainder of the night reviewing everything he had learned and trying to anticipate what challenges Whitman might pose. Elaine moved quietly around their small kitchen, preparing a breakfast. Neither of them had the appetite to eat, the tension of the coming confrontation filling the space between them. "You don't have to do this," she said softly, placing a plate of toast before her son. "We can just leave, find another job." Marcus looked up at her, seeing the worry lines etched deeply around her eyes. "If we run now, they win," he replied with a simplicity that belied the complexity of his understanding. "And I think there's something really wrong happening there, Mom. Something bigger than us." Elaine studied her son, this child who sometimes seemed like a stranger to her with his extraordinary mind, yet whose moral compass pointed as true as any shed ever known. She nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of his choice and her support. They arrived at Axion Technologies 45 minutes early, but Zoe was already waiting for them at the entrance, her face showing signs of her own sleepless night. "They've changed the security protocols overnight," she whispered as they walked through the lobby. "My access to the technical libraries has been restricted, and they're checking everyone's credentials more carefully than usual." The main conference room had been transformed for the occasion. Where normally it held a single long table surrounded by chairs, now it featured a central workstation facing a semicircle of seats occupied by senior Axion executives, technical leads, and even 2 representatives from the company's legal department. A large digital display dominated the wall behind the workstation, currently showing the Axion logo in glowing blue. Richard Whitman sat at the center of the assembly, his posture radiating confident authority. He smiled thinly as Marcus entered with his mother and Zoe. "Right on time. Excellent." He gestured to the workstation. "Your challenge awaits, young man." Marcus approached slowly, conscious of the dozens of eyes tracking his movement. The workstation screen flickered to life as he sat down, displaying a complex encryption problem far more sophisticated than the one from the previous night. Whitman spoke from behind him, his voice carrying easily in the hushed room. "This is a variant of the quantum-resistant encryption protocol our team has been developing. No one outside this room has seen this particular iteration." He paused for effect. You have 1 hour. A digital timer appeared in the corner of the screen, numbers glowing red as they began their countdown. Marcus took a deep breath and began to work, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he constructed his approach to the problem. The room faded away from his awareness, the murmured conversations of the observers becoming nothing more than background noise as his mind immersed itself in the elegant complexity before him. He was approaching the problem differently than most would, using an intuitive understanding of pattern recognition that bypassed several conventional steps. 20 minutes into the challenge, one of the technical leads leaned forward, frowning at the screen. "What methodology is he using?" he whispered to his colleague. "That's not the standard lattice-based approach." The whispers spread through the observers, growing in volume and intensity as Marcus continued his unorthodox solution. 35 minutes in, Whitman received a text message that caused him to stiffen visibly. He rose from his seat and approached one of the legal representatives, engaging in a heated whisper that drew curious glances from others in the room. Marcus, oblivious to the growing tension behind him, had reached a critical juncture in his solution. As he worked through the final equations, a pattern began to emerge, a pattern that extended beyond the specific problem he had been given. He paused, his young brow furrowing in concentration as he recognized similarities to the financial inconsistencies had noticed in his earlier explorations. With sudden clarity, he realized the encryption wasn't just a security measure. It was a concealment mechanism designed to hide transactions within the system. The implications sent a chill through him even as he completed the solution. Just as Marcus entered the final sequence, Whitman suddenly moved toward the front of the room. "That's enough," he announced loudly. "The demonstration is over," but his interruption came seconds too late. Marcus hit the execute command, and the screen flashed green as the system accepted his solution. The encryption protocol unraveled, and for a brief moment before Whitman could intervene, the screen displayed not just the solution but a glimpse of the underlying data structure complete with anomalous transaction patterns that should not have been there. A stunned silence fell over the room. The technical leads exchanged confused glances, several of them leaning forward to get a better view of the screen before Whitman managed to shut it down. "As I said," Whitman continued, his voice tight with controlled anger, "the demonstration is concluded. While impressive for a child, the solution was incomplete and would not be viable in a production environment. It was a transparent lie, and from the expressions of several technical staff, not everyone was convinced." Marcus turned in his chair to face the room, his young face serious, but his eyes bright with the knowledge of what he had just uncovered. "The solution works," he said clearly, his voice carrying despite its softness. "But there's something wrong with the underlying system. The encryption isn't just protecting data, it's hiding irregular financial transactions." The effect of his words was immediate. Several executives straightened in alarm, while others exchanged confused looks. Whitman's face darkened dangerously. "Security," he called sharply. "Please escort Mrs. Johnson and her son from the building. Their presence here is no longer required or welcome." 2 security guards moved forward immediately, their expressions professionally blank. "And Miss Chen," Whitman added, his gaze shifting to Zoe, who had half risen from her seat in protest, "report to HR immediately. Your employment status requires urgent review." As they were led from the conference room, Marcus caught fragments of the heated discussion already erupting behind them. What did he mean by irregular transactions? Is there any validity to absolutely not? The boy clearly doesn't understand. The last thing Marcus saw before the door closed was Whitman calling the room to order, his face set in rigid lines as he announced, "Emergency board meeting, 15 minutes. All non-essential personnel are dismissed." The sky had clouded over by the time they were escorted from the Axion building, the security guards maintaining cold professionalism as they returned Elaine's badge and informed her that her access had been suspended pending review. A fine mist of rain began to fall as they stood on the sidewalk, momentarily uncertain of their next move. Zoe joined them minutes later, her face flushed with anger. "They put me on administrative leave," she said without preamble. "Claimed I violated multiple security protocols and facilitated unauthorized access to company systems. She ran a hand through her purple-streaked hair in frustration. They even confiscated my laptop before I could clear my personal files. Marcus looked up at her, guilt creasing his young face. "I'm sorry, Zoe. This is my fault." She shook her head firmly. "No, it's not. Whitman is hiding something, and we're getting too close to it." They made their way to a small cafe, several blocks from Axion, seeking both shelter from the increasingly heavy rain and a place to talk safely. Once settled in a corner booth with steaming cups before them, Zoe and Elaine coffee, Marcus hot chocolate, the boy began explaining in detail what had discovered. "The encryption system isn't just for security," he said, keeping his voice low. "It's hiding a pattern of transactions that shouldn't be there. Small amounts, fractions of pennies really, being redirected during normal financial operations." Zoe leaned forward, her technical background allowing her to grasp the implications immediately. "Like the salami slicing attack from Office Space? Taking tiny amounts that no one would notice?" Marcus nodded eagerly. "Exactly, but much more sophisticated. The algorithm is designed to skim these micro amounts from thousands of transactions simultaneously, then route them through a series of encrypted pathways that make them almost impossible to trace." He hesitated, then added, "And from what I saw in those few seconds when the solution ran, it's been happening for years. Billions of dollars in total." Elaine looked between them, her expression troubled. "Are you saying, Mr. Whitman is stealing from the company?" "Not just from Axion," Marcus replied. "From every financial institution that uses their transaction processing system. Banks, investment firms, pension funds, all of them." The enormity of the fraud began to sink in, leaving them sitting in stunned silence for several moments. Finally, Zoe spoke, her voice hardened with resolve. "We need proof, something concrete that we can take to the authorities." She glanced around the cafe before continuing. "I still have my personal laptop at home. If I can access the Axion servers remotely, maybe we can document what's happening before they manage to cover their tracks." Elaine shook her head, fear evident in her expression. "Isn't that dangerous? These people have already shown they'll do anything to protect themselves. More dangerous than doing nothing?" Zoe countered gently. "If what Marcus discovered is true, we're talking about billions of dollars in fraud affecting thousands of companies and potentially millions of individuals." Their discussion was interrupted by Elaine's phone ringing. She frowned at the unknown number before answering cautiously. The color drained from her face as she listened, her hand tightening around the device. "Yes, I understand. Well, be there immediately. Thank you." She ended the call and looked up with wide, frightened eyes. That was social services. Someone made an anonymous complaint about educational neglect. They're at our apartment now, and if we're not there in 30 minutes, they're threatening to start removal proceedings. "That's not a coincidence," Zoe said flatly. "Whitman is playing dirty." The drive to Elaine's apartment was tense, Zoe navigating through traffic with grim determination in her borrowed car, while Elaine tried to contain her mounting panic. Marcus sat quietly in the back seat, his mind racing through possibilities and connections, the mathematical patterns of the encryption problem overlaying with the sudden offensive moves being made against his family. The social services worker waiting at their apartment was a harried-looking woman with a clipboard and a skeptical expression. She introduced herself as Mrs. Patel and proceeded to ask pointed questions about Marcus' schooling and home environment, making notes that seemed deliberately obtuse. "We've received concerns that Marcus is being kept from appropriate educational opportunities," she stated, eyeing the modest apartment with barely concealed judgment. "There are also allegations of him being brought to inappropriate workplace environments during late hours." Elaine maintained her composure with visible effort, explaining Marcus' advanced placement at school and the occasional necessity of bringing him to her night shift due to childcare limitations. The interview might have continued its troubling trajectory had it not been for an unexpected knock at the door. When Elaine opened it, she found herself facing a tall, elegant black woman in her 50s, dressed in a tailored suit and carrying a leather briefcase. "Mrs. Johnson?" the woman asked, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "I'm Dr. Abigail Foster. I believe I can be of assistance. Before Elaine could respond, Dr. Foster had swept into the apartment, addressing the social worker with practiced efficiency. "I'm a tenured professor of applied mathematics at State University and former lead quantum computing researcher at NIST," she said, presenting credentials that caused Mrs. Patel's eyebrows to rise appreciably. "I'm also Marcus' former kindergarten teacher before I returned to academic research." She smiled at the boy, who was staring at her with surprised recognition. "I've been following news of a prodigy at Axion Technologies who solved an unsolvable encryption problem. Imagine my delight at discovering it was my former student." What followed was a masterclass in professional intervention. Dr. Foster presented documentation of Marcus' early aptitude tests, records of the enrichment activities Shed provided during his time in her classroom, and her own expert assessment of his exceptional mathematical abilities. By the time she finished, Mrs. Patel was apologizing for the inconvenience and assuring them that her report would reflect no concerns about Marcus' educational welfare. After the social worker left, Dr. Foster turned to the three of them with a more serious expression. "Now, perhaps you should tell me what's really going on. Because corporate executives don't typically sick social services on custodial staff without significant provocation." Over the next hour, they explained everything. Marcus' secret learning at Axion, the encryption challenge, and the financial irregularities Head uncovered. Dr. Foster listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly grave. When they finished, she remained silent for several moments, then opened her briefcase and removed a laptop. "Before I left academia for teaching, my specialty was quantum cryptography and its applications in financial systems," she said, powering up the computer. "And before that, I worked briefly at Whitman's previous company, until I raised questions about some of their financial practices and found myself summarily dismissed with my reputation in tatters." She looked up, her eyes sharp with old pain and new purpose. "I've been watching Richard Whitman for years, gathering evidence but never finding the smoking gun that would prove what I suspected." She turned the laptop toward Marcus. "Show me exactly what you saw in that encryption system." The following days unfolded in a whirlwind of activity as their small group expanded its investigation into Axion's financial systems. Dr. Foster's apartment became their base of operations, offering both the security of its upscale building and the technical resources necessary for their work. Marcus and Dr. Foster formed an immediate intellectual bond, their minds operating on similar wavelengths despite the 4-decade age difference between them. Together, they reconstructed the encryption solution, working to understand the full scope of the fraud hidden within its elegant mathematical structure. Zoe, using security vulnerabilities she had discovered during her time at Axion, established limited access to the company's servers through carefully disguised proxy connections. Elaine, though unable to contribute to the technical aspects of their work, provided crucial organizational support, managing their growing collection of evidence and ensuring that essential details weren't overlooked in the flood of information they were accumulating. 3 days into their investigation, Dr. Foster made a crucial connection. "We need to talk to Jordan Williams," she announced one morning as they gathered around her dining table, which had disappeared beneath laptops, notebooks, and empty coffee cups. "He was a senior programmer at Axion 2 years ago, specialized in financial transaction systems. He raised concerns about irregularities in the code and was fired within a week." Zoe looked up from her screen, recognition dawning. "I remember hearing about him when I first started. The official story was that he made critical errors that nearly compromised the entire system." Dr. Foster nodded grimly. "A familiar pattern. Richard Whitman has a history of discrediting whistleblowers, especially those from marginalized backgrounds. Jordan is black, like most of the employees who've mysteriously failed after questioning Axion's practices. Locating Jordan proved challenging. Head effectively disappeared from the tech world following his dismissal from Axion. Eventually, through connections in the academic community, Dr. Foster arranged a meeting at a public library across town, where the risk of surveillance was minimized. Jordan Williams was younger than they had expected, perhaps in his early 30s, but his eyes carried the wariness of someone who had faced significant adversity. His initial skepticism was evident as Dr. Foster made introductions, but it began to fade as Marcus described the encryption system and the hidden transaction patterns embedded within it. "That's it," Jordan said, his voice tight with vindication. "That's exactly what I found 2 years ago, but I couldn't prove it definitively before they shut me down." He pulled out his own laptop, revealing that Head continued his investigation despite the personal and professional costs. "After Axion, no reputable tech company would touch me. Whitman made sure of that, spreading rumors that I was incompetent at best, possibly unstable. But I knew what I'd seen, so I kept digging. The combined evidence painted a damning picture. Richard Whitman, along with a small group of senior executives, had designed an elaborate system to skim microscopic amounts from financial transactions processed through Axion's widely used platform. The individual amounts were so small that they went unnoticed, but with millions of transactions processed daily across hundreds of financial institutions, the total reached staggering proportions. "They've been running this for at least 5 years, Jordan explained, scrolling through transaction logs he had painstakingly reconstructed. "Conservative estimate? At least $2 billion, possibly much more, all funneled through shell companies and offshore accounts. What made the scheme particularly insidious was how the quantum encryption protocol masked the unauthorized transactions. "It's brilliant, in an evil way," Marcus commented, earning a surprised look from the adults around him. "The encryption doesn't just hide the transactions. It makes them look like normal system operations, if anyone does spot them. You'd need to understand both quantum cryptography and financial systems to even recognize what was happening." Their work took on greater urgency when Zoe, monitoring Axion's internal communications through her limited access, discovered alarming news. "They're implementing a system-wide update next week," she reported. "According to these specs, it will completely overwrite the current transaction processing framework." Jordan's expression darkened. "They're covering their tracks. Once that update goes through, all evidence of the manipulation will be permanently erased." They had 72 hours to document the fraud and find a way to prove it conclusively before the evidence disappeared forever. The pressure intensified when Marcus, accompanying Dr. Foster to meet a potential ally at an upscale cafe near the financial district, experienced firsthand the realities of racial profiling. While Dr. Foster was speaking with their contact at another table, Marcus sat alone reviewing notes on his tablet. A security guard approached, his hand resting pointedly on his weapon. "Excuse me, young man, can I see some ID?" Marcus looked up in confusion. "I'm 8 years old. I don't have ID." The guard's expression hardened. "Then you need to leave." Someone reported a suspicious individual accessing financial information on a device. Before Marcus could explain that he was with Dr. N.T.W.W. Garda Foster, the guard was joined by the cafe manager, who stated loudly that suspicious characters were not welcome in their establishment. The confrontation quickly drew attention from other patrons, some of whom began filming with their phones. Dr. Foster intervened, her professional demeanor momentarily giving way to righteous indignation as she identified herself and Marcus, making it clear that the only suspicious aspect of the situation was the cafe's treatment of a black child in an upscale establishment. The incident, though resolved without physical escalation, shook Marcus in ways that his intellectual precociousness hadn't prepared him for. That evening, back at Dr. Foster's apartment, he sat quietly at the window, watching the city lights emerge as dusk settled. Elaine found him there, instantly recognizing the shadow that had fallen across her son's normally inquisitive expression. She sat beside him, not speaking immediately, but offering the comfort of her presence. "Is it always going to be like this?" Marcus finally asked, his voice small but steady. "People assuming I'm doing something wrong just because of how I look?" Elaine chose her words carefully, balancing honesty with hope. "It's been that way for a long time, but it doesn't have to stay that way. Change happens when people like us refuse to accept the limitations others try to place on us." She gently turned him to face her. "That's part of why what you're doing now is so important. It's not just about the money Whitman stole. It's about showing the world that brilliance and integrity come in all colors. Their moment was interrupted when Jordan burst into the room, his expression urgent. "We have a problem," he announced. "The system update has been moved up. It's scheduled to begin in 72 hours. Dr. Foster joined them, laptop in hand. "That's not all," she added grimly. "I just received word that the FBI has opened an investigation, but not into Whitman. Into us. Someone has filed a report claiming we're attempting to hack Axion's systems for corporate espionage purposes. The walls were closing in, their window of opportunity shrinking rapidly." As the adults discussed strategies and contingencies, Marcus returned to the window, his young mind already formulating a counter-strategy that would require every bit of his unique abilities, and the courage his mother had just reminded him was part of his heritage. "We need to go on offense," Marcus stated with unexpected firmness, turning from the window to face the room. The adults paused their increasingly circular discussion, surprised by both his tone and the strategic clarity in his expression. "Defense isn't working," he continued. "Mr. Whitman has too many advantages: power, money, connections. We need to change the game." Over the next several hours, fueled by delivery pizza and endless coffee, hot chocolate for Marcus, they developed a new approach. Rather than simply trying to document the fraud before evidence disappeared, they would create an algorithm that would not only expose the scheme, but systematically trace and document every illicit transaction in Axion's system. "Think of it like a quantum bloodhound," Marcus explained, sketching diagrams that Dr. Foster quickly translated into more formal mathematical notations. Once installed in their system, it will identify the specific signature of the fraudulent transactions and follow them backward through all the encryption layers, creating an audit trail that can't be erased. Jordan and Zoe worked to translate the conceptual framework into actual code, while Dr. Foster refined the quantum elements of the algorithm. Marcus moved between them, his unique perspective bridging theoretical and practical aspects in ways that continually surprised the experienced professionals. As dawn broke on their second straight night of work, they had created a powerful tool that could potentially unravel years of sophisticated financial fraud in a matter of hours. However, a critical challenge remained. They needed physical access to Axion's main servers to upload the algorithm. Remote access through Zoe's compromised credentials wouldn't provide the necessary system permissions, and any attempt to escalate privileges remotely would likely trigger security alerts. "We could try social engineering," Jordan suggested, without much conviction. "Maybe create a pretext to get someone inside to do it for us." Dr. Foster shook her head. "Too risky. After what's happened, Whitman will have everyone on high alert for unusual requests or activities." Their brainstorming was interrupted by a commotion at the door as two police officers entered Dr. Foster's apartment, responding to reports of suspicious activity. Though the officers eventually left without making arrests after Dr. Foster calmly explained they were collaborating on an educational project for gifted students, the incident highlighted their increasing vulnerability. "They're watching us," Zoe said after the police departed, "and probably monitoring our communications too." Jordan nodded grimly. "My apartment was ransacked yesterday. Nothing valuable was taken, but all my hard drives and notebooks are gone. The surveillance extended beyond physical intrusion. When they attempted to contact the FBI through official channels, they discovered that Whitman had indeed filed preemptive reports, painting them as disgruntled employees and hackers attempting corporate sabotage. Their emails bounced back undelivered, and phone calls to the Financial Crimes Division went mysteriously unanswered or were redirected to voicemail boxes that never yielded responses. "Whitman has friends in law enforcement," Dr. Foster explained with resignation born of experience. "Not unusual for someone of his wealth and position. We can't rely on official channels until we have irrefutable evidence." The combined pressure of surveillance, time constraints, and the technical challenges of their task created an atmosphere of tense determination in their makeshift headquarters. They worked in shifts, always maintaining operational security measures that Jordan had learned from cybersecurity forums, two individuals monitoring external approaches to the building, encrypted communications only, and regular sweeps for electronic surveillance devices. Marcus continued refining their quantum algorithm, making it more efficient and harder to detect once deployed. 4 days after their initial discovery, with less than 48 hours remaining before Axion's system update, they still lacked a viable method for accessing the company's servers. The team gathered for what felt like a last-ditch strategy session, fatigue evident in their faces and voices. "Maybe we need to accept that we can't win this directly," Jordan said, the defeat in his tone painful to hear from someone who had already lost so much to Whitman's machinations. "Perhaps we should release what we have anonymously to the media, hope that public attention forces an investigation. That would just give them time to cover their tracks more thoroughly," Zoe countered. "Without hard evidence, it'll be dismissed as conspiracy theories." The debate continued in circles until Elaine, who had been quietly listening while preparing sandwiches for the group, spoke up. "I might have a way in," she said softly. All eyes turned to her in surprise. She had been an essential part of their effort, handling logistics and ensuring everyone remembered to eat and rest, but had rarely contributed to the technical or strategic discussions. "I still have my access card," she explained. "They suspended my access but never asked for the physical card back. And I know the building better than anyone from cleaning every floor for 3 years." Marcus looked at his mother with new understanding. "Mom, that's really risky. If they catch you—" She smiled at him with quiet determination. "Then they catch me. But we have to try." Her expression grew more serious as she outlined her thinking. "Next Tuesday is the annual shareholders meeting. Every executive and most of the senior staff will be in the main auditorium for at least 2 hours. Security will be focused on the entrance points and the auditorium itself." Jordan leaned forward, interest kindling in his tired eyes. "The server room would be minimally staffed during a major event like that. And I know the maintenance schedules, which security cameras have blind spots, which doors have faulty alarms," Elaine continued. "The cleaning staff knows everything about a building that others overlook." A plan began to take shape, incorporating Elaine's intimate knowledge of Axion's physical space with the technical expertise of the others. She would enter through a service entrance during the catering delivery for the shareholders' meeting, disguised as part of the setup crew. Once inside, she would help Marcus and Jordan navigate to the server room, while Zoe monitored security systems remotely, and Dr. Foster coordinated from outside, ready to create a distraction if necessary. They spent the next day in careful preparation, creating fake credentials, memorizing building layouts, and rehearsing their movements. Marcus worked with Jordan to compress their quantum algorithm into a format that could be quickly uploaded with minimal system interaction required. The night before the operation, as final preparations were being made, Marcus found his mother sitting alone on Dr. Plastand, Foster's balcony, looking out at the city lights. He joined her silently, leaning against her side as he had done since he was small. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said simply. Elaine put her arm around him, pulling him closer. "I'm proud of us," she replied. "Whatever happens tomorrow, remember that we're doing the right thing. That's what matters most." She kissed the top of his head, then added with a smile, "And remember what I always tell you." Marcus nodded, completing their long-standing exchange. Being underestimated can be a superpower if you know how to use it. The morning of the shareholders' meeting dawned clear and cool, the late autumn sunlight glinting off Axion Technologies' glass and steel headquarters as the team put their plan into motion. Elaine, dressed in the black pants and white shirt of the catering staff, hair tucked under a cap, joined the stream of workers entering through the service entrance. Her heart pounded as she presented the forged credentials Jordan had created, but the security guard barely glanced at them, focused on managing the influx of catering and technical personnel, preparing for the high-profile event. She sent a brief text confirmation once inside, then made her way to a predetermined maintenance closet on the second floor, well away from the auditorium where final preparations for the shareholders' meeting were underway. 20 minutes later, Marcus and Jordan arrived through the same entrance, using the temporary confusion of a large coffee delivery to blend with the workers. Jordan wore the uniform of the AV technical staff, his forged badge, identifying him as part of the team handling presentation technology. Marcus, too small for any believable staff role, was simply dressed in standard business casual clothing, the kind a staff member's child might wear if brought to work for some reason. A Bluetooth earpiece connected all team members to Zoe, who had positioned herself in a cafe across the street with a laptop, using her knowledge of Axion systems to monitor security camera feeds and electronic access points. Dr. Foster remained in her car in the parking garage, ready to create a distraction if needed, a portfolio of falsified investment documents in hand that would give her a plausible reason to approach the main entrance. Status update. Zoe's voice came through their earpieces as Elaine led Marcus and Jordan from the maintenance closet, moving purposefully but unhurriedly through the service corridors. Main auditorium is filling up, security concentrated at primary entrances and executive floor. Server room has 2 technicians on duty, standard rotation. The trio moved through the building using Elaine's knowledge of service pathways and maintenance tunnels, avoiding the main corridors where security cameras had full coverage. Their first significant obstacle came at a security checkpoint between the public areas and the technical sections of the building. Jordan had anticipated this, creating a work order in the system for emergency maintenance on the climate control system near the server rooms to justify their presence in the restricted area. The security guard examined their credentials more carefully this time, his expression skeptical as he looked at Marcus. "Who's the kid?" he asked, hand hovering near his radio. "My son," Elaine replied smoothly. "Childcare fell through, and they needed all hands for this emergency cooling repair. My supervisor authorized it." She nodded toward Jordan, who projected confidence as the supposed team lead. After a tense moment, the guard shrugged and waved them through, more concerned with the high-profile event in progress than with maintenance staff. Once past the checkpoint, they encountered an unexpected complication. New biometric locks had been installed on the access doors leading to the most sensitive areas, including the server room corridor. "These weren't here last week," Jordan muttered, examining the sleek fingerprint scanner beside the door. "Whitman must have upgraded security after what happened." Through their earpieces, Zoe's voice betrayed controlled stress. "I can't bypass those remotely. They're on a separate system from the main security network." As they deliberated, the sound of approaching voices forced them into a small utility room. Through the partially open door, they watched as 2 members of the security team passed, engaged in conversation about the shareholders' meeting. "Whitman is paranoid today," one was saying. He skipped the executive breakfast to personally review the presentation materials again and insisted on extra personnel near the technical areas. This unexpected information added urgency to their already time-sensitive mission. If Whitman was moving around the building rather than remaining with the other executives, the risk of discovery increased significantly. Adapting quickly, they formulated a new approach. Using Elaine's knowledge of the building's infrastructure, they accessed a maintenance shaft that bypassed the biometric security, emerging in a service corridor 1 floor below the server room. A maintenance ladder would allow access to the utility space directly beneath the target, where Jordan believed they could access the floor panels leading into the server room itself. The climb was particularly challenging for Marcus, whose small stature made reaching the ladder rungs difficult, but with Elaine's help, he managed the ascent. The space above was cramped and dusty, filled with cable trays and ventilation ducts. Jordan oriented himself using the building schematics they'd studied, identifying the access panel that should open into a section of the server room with minimal surveillance coverage. Just as Jordan prepared to open the panel, Zoe's urgent voice came through their earpieces. "Movement alert. Whitman is heading toward the server area with 2 security personnel. ETA, 2 minutes." The timing couldn't have been worse. They were literally beneath their target, but would emerge directly into the path of the CEO if they proceeded now. Elaine made a quick decision, squeezing Jordan's arm to stop him from opening the panel. "Change of plan," she whispered. "We need to split up." Despite Marcus' protests, she outlined a rapid revision of their strategy. She would create a distraction by accidentally encountering Whitman in the corridor, playing the role of a confused maintenance worker who had taken a wrong turn. Jordan would use the diversion to access the server room through the panel. Marcus, however, had a different idea. "Let me be the distraction," he said, his young voice steady despite the tension surrounding them. Mr. Whitman won't expect to see me. He'll be so surprised and angry that he'll focus completely on me." Both adults started to object, but Marcus continued. "You both know more about the technical aspects than I do. Jordan needs to upload the algorithm, and Mom knows the building best to help him if something goes wrong. I'm the logical choice." The determination in his expression silenced their objections. With no time to debate further, they quickly restructured their plan. Marcus would return to the main corridor and deliberately cross paths with Whitman, while Elaine and Jordan proceeded with accessing the server room during the distraction. Marcus climbed back down the maintenance ladder and made his way to the main corridor, heart racing but mind focused. He positioned himself at a junction where he would inevitably encounter Whitman's group, then waited, counting seconds in his head as had been taught by Dr. Foster to manage anxiety. The approaching footsteps signaled Whitman's arrival. Marcus stepped out into the corridor just as the CEO rounded the corner, flanked by 2 security guards. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Whitman stopped abruptly, his face registering shock before contorting with anger. "You!" he exclaimed. "How did you get in here? Security! Detain this boy immediately!" Rather than attempting to flee, Marcus stood his ground, summoning every ounce of courage his 8-year-old frame could contain. "Hello, Mr. Whitman," he said clearly. "I came to talk to you about the encryption algorithm and the missing money." The direct reference to the fraud caused Whitman's expression to shift from anger to alarm. He gestured sharply for the security personnel to stop, then glanced around the corridor. "Bring him in here," he ordered, indicating a nearby conference room, "and check the surrounding areas. He can't be alone." The diversion worked perfectly. As security fanned out to search for other intruders, Elaine and Jordan successfully accessed the server room through the floor panel, emerging in a section temporarily vacated as the technicians responded to the commotion in the corridor. Jordan moved swiftly to a terminal, inserting the drive containing their quantum algorithm, while Elaine kept watch. Meanwhile, in the conference room, Marcus found himself face-to-face with Richard Whitman, the security guards positioned outside the door. The CEO's attempt at intimidation was palpable as he loomed over the boy. "Whatever you think you're doing, it's over," Whitman said, his voice cold. "You have no idea who you're dealing with or what forces you're playing with." Despite his racing heart, Marcus maintained his composure. "I understand exactly what I'm doing," he replied. "And I know what you've been doing too, stealing billions through fractional transactions hidden by quantum encryption." Whitman's face remained impassive, but a slight twitch at the corner of his eye betrayed his surprise at the boy's precise knowledge. "Imaginative, but ultimately foolish," he said. "You have no proof, no standing, and no credibility. Who would believe the fantasies of a custodian's child over the word of a Forbes 500 CEO? What Whitman didn't know was that Marcus wasn't trying to convince him or win the argument. He was simply creating time for the algorithm to complete its work. In the server room, Jordan had successfully initiated the upload, the progress bar advancing steadily as the quantum algorithm integrated itself into Axion's systems. 65%, he muttered into his earpiece, updating the team. "We need another 3 minutes." Elaine, watching the door, whispered back, "Security is returning to regular patterns." The distraction worked. The algorithm reached completion just as security personnel reported finding no other intruders in the area. Jordan removed all traces of their access, and he and Elaine retreated back through the floor panel, securing it behind them. Now came the most audacious part of their plan. Rather than attempting to escape with Marcus, they would proceed directly to the shareholders' meeting, which was now well underway in the main auditorium. As the quantum algorithm began its work, systematically identifying and documenting every fraudulent transaction in Axion's system, Marcus continued his conversation with Whitman, carefully monitoring the time. When his earpiece discreetly signaled the upload's completion, he changed tactics. "You're right, mister." "Whitman," he said, his voice taking on a childish quality that belied his next words. "No one would believe me without proof. That's why we brought the proof with us." Whitman's confidence faltered momentarily. "What are you talking about? What proof?" Rather than answering, Marcus walked calmly to the door and opened it, addressing the security guards. "I need to go to the shareholders' meeting now. It's important." The guards looked to Whitman for direction, confusion evident in their expressions. Before the CEO could respond, the building's emergency systems suddenly activated, screens throughout the facility displaying an override message. System integrity verification in progress. It was the first visible sign of their algorithm at work, beginning its systematic exposure of the fraudulent transactions. Whitman recognized the implications immediately. His face paled as he lunged for his phone, frantically dialing the head of IT security. Marcus used the momentary distraction to slip past him, moving quickly toward the auditorium with security personnel following in confused pursuit. The scene that unfolded next would later be described by attendees as something from a movie. Marcus walked confidently into the shareholders' meeting, where hundreds of investors, board members, and financial analysts were assembled. The presentation screens that had been showing Action's projected earnings suddenly flickered, then began displaying transaction logs, account numbers, and flowcharts detailing years of systematic fraud. Security personnel, still following Marcus, created additional commotion as they entered the auditorium. Whitman arrived moments later. His normally composed demeanor shattered as he shouted for the technical team to shut down the presentation system. But it was too late. The quantum algorithm had integrated itself too deeply into Action's systems, methodically exposing the evidence of fraud to the assembled financial stakeholders and media representatives. Standing in the center of the unfolding chaos, holding a flash drive containing copies of the evidence being displayed around him, Marcus Johnson, the 8-year-old son of a custodian, had accomplished what teams of financial regulators and corporate auditors had failed to do. He had exposed one of the largest and most sophisticated financial frauds in modern history. 6 months after the dramatic exposure of the Axion Technologies fraud, Marcus Johnson sat before the Senate Banking Committee, his small frame nearly lost behind the massive wooden witness table. Despite his youth, his testimony was articulate and precise as he explained in accessible terms how the quantum algorithm had uncovered Richard Whitman's criminal enterprise. The encryption wasn't just protecting data, he told the assembled senators, some of whom leaned forward with genuine interest, while others struggled to mask their disbelief that a child could understand such complexities. It was hiding a pattern of theft that took tiny amounts from millions of transactions every day, adding up to billions over 5 years. The hearings had been going on for weeks, with testimony from financial experts, former Axion executives who had turned state's evidence, and regulatory officials explaining how such massive fraud had escaped detection. Marcus' appearance, initially controversial, had been deemed essential by the committee chair after expert witnesses repeatedly referenced his unique contribution to unraveling the scheme. In the months since the shareholders' meeting, the full scope of Whitman financial crimes had become clear. $3.4 billion had been siphoned from financial transactions processed through Action's systems, affecting over 300 companies and countless individual investors. Whitman himself, along with 7 senior executives, faced federal charges carrying potential sentences of decades in prison. The story had dominated financial news, then mainstream media, and finally popular culture, with Marcus reluctantly becoming something of a celebrity, a status that both confused and occasionally annoyed him. His mother's protective instincts had served them well during this period, as Elaine carefully managed media access and ensured that Marcus' education and well-being remained priorities despite the whirlwind surrounding them. The $100 million challenge that Whitman had mockingly offered had become an unexpected epilogue to the story. During initial legal proceedings, Marcus' legal team, provided pro bono by a coalition of financial institutions affected by the fraud, had raised the issue of the public offer. Whitman's defense had dismissed it as obvious hyperbole, but internal Axion communications discovered during the investigation revealed that the offer had been documented in official minutes as a potential performance incentive. After months of legal maneuvering, the courts ruled that the offer constituted a binding contract that Whitman had made in his official capacity as CEO, and that Marcus had indisputably fulfilled the stated conditions. The resulting judgment required that $100 million from Whitman's frozen assets be placed in trust for Marcus. following extensive discussions with his mother and Dr. Foster, who had become a permanent fixture in their lives. Marcus decided that the majority of the funds would establish the Johnson Foundation for Educational Equity, dedicated to supporting gifted students from underserved communities and reforming STEM education to be more inclusive. Elaine, who had initially returned to school to complete her long-deferred college education, discovered a natural talent for administrative leadership and eventually became the Foundation's executive director. Her intimate understanding of the barriers facing working-class families made her uniquely qualified to shape programs that provided meaningful support rather than token opportunities. Axion Technologies itself had undergone comprehensive restructuring under court supervision. With its former leadership removed, the company had been rebuilt with a focus on ethical practices and corporate responsibility. Somewhat ironically, the quantum security algorithm that Marcus had created to expose the fraud had been refined into a new gold standard for financial security systems, with his name on the patent and a portion of licensing revenues flowing into the foundation. Zoe Chen had been instrumental in this development, returning to Axion as part of the new leadership team focused on ethical applications of technology. Jordan Williams, whose career had been derailed by Whitman's retaliatory tactics, found vindication not only through the exposure of the fraud he had first suspected, but also in a new role leading industry efforts to establish better protections for technical whistleblowers. Dr. Foster, coming full circle from her own experience of corporate retaliation years earlier, divided her time between academic research and advising the foundation, particularly enjoying her role mentoring Marcus as he navigated the accelerated educational path that his abilities demanded. On this particular day, following his Senate testimony, Marcus attended a ceremony honoring young innovators at the National Science Foundation. As photographers captured images of him accepting an award, he noticed a small girl standing at the edge of the crowd, watching the proceedings with intense interest. Something in her expression tugged at his memory, his own reflection years earlier, a mind full of questions that no one around seemed able to answer. After the ceremony, he approached her and her mother, introducing himself simply as Marcus. The girl, 7-year-old Amara Washington, regarded him with solemn intelligence. "I saw you on the news," she said. "You used math to catch bad guys." Marcus smiled. "Something like that. Do you like math too?" Amara nodded emphatically. "I love numbers. They make patterns that other people don't see." The conversation that followed convinced Marcus that he had found another extraordinary mind, one currently confined to an educational system not designed for such outliers. Before they parted, he provided Amara's mother with information about the Foundation's programs, personally committing to follow up on her application. That evening, in the hotel suite where they were staying during their Washington visit, Marcus sat with his mother by the window, looking out at the national monuments illuminated against the night sky. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked suddenly. "Getting involved in all this. Your life was harder but simpler before." Elaine considered the question thoughtfully. "Never," she finally said, "not just because of the opportunities it created for us, but because it was the right thing to do. Systems designed to exclude people like us don't change unless someone challenges them." She squeezed his shoulder gently. "That's the real work still ahead for all of us, transforming those systems into ones that empower rather than limit." Marcus nodded, his gaze returning to the window where the lights of the city twinkled like the complex patterns he'd always seen in the world, waiting to be decoded by those willing to look beyond the obvious. "What do you think is possible when we recognize and nurture brilliance wherever it appears, regardless of background or circumstance? Has there been a time when you or someone you know was underestimated based on appearance or background? Comment below with your thoughts and experiences. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to our channel for more narratives that challenge perceptions and celebrate unexpected heroes. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that true intelligence and courage can come from the most underestimated people. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and remember, the most powerful algorithms are the ones that calculate not just data, but human potential.